What the hell? Let's do it.
That's the spirit. To quote the great Joseph Campbell, he said, "It is by going down into the abyss where we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." To the ironic twist of the unknown. Bottoms up.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome, everybody, to Aeon Bite. Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. My name is Miguel Connor, as always, and I am your Pompatus of Gnosis, and hopefully your psychopomp to better realities and insights that help your life in a way that you can understand and just for you. Welcome, you spiritual entrepreneurs, you veterans of 1,000 psychic wars, and you modern day Tom Sawyers, your mind not for rent to any god or government. So happy to see you, and it's always good to do a show on a Wednesday on Mercury Day, as this is the age of Hermes, as I like to say. And today I am very excited to have with us Simon Bown to discuss a book that I thought was amazing, and that is Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife. Simon, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I hate saying things like the science is settled, but your book almost puts another nail in the coffin of reductionist materialism, and that's good. It's so good. And also you bring a lot of very exciting ideas and hypothesis on this phenomenon. So good work, and we'll certainly unpack all of that. And with us too, we've got Graham Pong. Graham, how are you doing today on this Mercury Day?
I'm doing very well, Miguel. I'm looking to hear from Simon about how to get the N into the near-death experience. I think that's the secret to Maxwell smarting it, to miss it by just that much. Okay.
It is indeed. It is indeed. So awesome. Yes, not much in the housekeeping. Again, my new podcast, Gen X Wasteland, where we discuss Elvis, David Bowie, and other musings, is on the channel. Last night we did an entire show where we broke down Elvis and David Bowie's natal charts and astrology and trying to understand their place in history and why certain events happen. So it was a good show. So check it out at my personal channel or at my Substack. And as always, please support Aeon Biden any way you can. Like, subscribe, join the AB Prime or Patreon. Help keep this red pill cafeteria open. I do take crypto donations or any way you can help. I've got an Amazon wish list somewhere, which I need to update. But if you want to support that way, always very cool. And lastly, yes, if you have any questions for Simon, please super chat them so we can separate them from the crowd, as it always gets very lively in the chat room with some very cool conversations. So Simon, this is your first time in the podcast, so could you please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you came to write the book?
Yes, so I live on the south coast of England right now. I used to live in London till I was about 40. And when I was like 10 years old, I would go to the local public library and take books out on things like Bigfoot and UFOs and ghosts and all kinds of supernatural things. And that would have been in the mid-70s. And then as I got older, I was reading more books and buying them. And I read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, which was 1976, I think it came out. And then through into the 80s, as I got older, I was going to the College of Psychic Studies, which is set up by the Society for Psychical Research. And it's been there, well, it must be 140 years now. But they would teach people mediumship and psychic stuff and channeling and past life regression. And so I wasn't a student there, but you could go there and pay a little bit of money and the students could practice on you. So it was kind of like an investigation. I wasn't trying to contact a deceased loved one. It was like I really wanted to see what would happen in these sort of places. So I did it every couple of weeks. I was sitting with all these different people. I was taken through a past life regression, which was really powerful. And then as time went on, I was having my own experiences, psychic flashes, UFO sightings that were really close up, and stuff with feathers showing up in a weird way. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts and doing a lot of reading, and I thought maybe I could do a podcast. I've been a musician for years, and I had recording software. I knew how to use that. So recording a voice is a piece of cake. So I was lucky enough that I started inviting people onto the podcast, and they said yes, even though I had 2 listeners, but at the time, but that was 2018. And so I've done over 350 one-hour interviews on my Paranormal Afterlife podcast, and I've done over 150 on my UFO podcast. And it's been a real education. And the people that come on, almost all of them have got a book out. So I've read their book to try and work out the questions. And I got to this point where my podcast is about evidence of the afterlife. It's like somebody says, the afterlife is real. I say, okay, where's your evidence?
Right.
And so you see that in near-death experiences and children with past life memories and stuff showing up in mediumship and deathbed visions and all sorts of things. And so I got to the point where I talked to so many people on the podcast. I was so fascinated by this thing of verification, where somebody, their body's dead, and they may be hooked up to these devices. So they know the heart stopped, the brain is flatlined. But while they're in that condition, they see something, say from the ceiling. And when they're resuscitated and they're stabilized, they describe everything they saw. And the people will say, but you were dead at that moment. There's no way you could have seen that. So it's a kind of a really strong verification that consciousness had left the body and that they retain these memories. And I did interview Dr. Eben Alexander, who was the professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School. He said to me, about 20 seconds after your heart stops, your brain will flatline, and it's impossible to make and retain complex memories. But that's exactly what is happening. So my book's got 30 cases, and each chapter's a different person, and I go through their whole near-death experience, not just their verification events. So I could see lots of consistency amongst all these near-death experiences that are in the book. And it's just been fascinating to write, and I love talking about it.
No, it's such a fascinating book, and so many. Yeah, the stories. It's overwhelming at times. It's almost conclusive, and I do enjoy your podcast, our paranormal life, afterlife. Sorry, and I enjoy the interviews I listen to. I'm subscribed, but I also enjoy your little 15-minute stories, like the one you had with Barbara, and it's almost like a murder mystery, like this adventure. Will they come back and woo and all that? So it's amazing. And as we were talking before the interview, you talked about Raymond Moody, and he's obviously his work is seminal in the field of near-death experiences. So for my Elvis book, I did tap into his book, Elvis Afterlife, and he, of course, there was a lot of NDEs finding with Elvis, including in another book that I researched his stepbrother, and a lot of people seeing Elvis was very busy in the afterlife and guiding people and all that. And of course, in this show, we talk about Jung is one of our pillars or inspirations. Jung had a near-death experience, and it changed his life. He saw the world, he saw the other world instead of going inner, and it was transformative to him. So it's a very busy universe. And so I like what you said, quoting the doctor, because isn't that the skeptic argument with some of these people who may pass away while the operation, that they're listening to things, so that's how they get this information? But that's not the case. That they are clinically dead, and in some cases their eyes are shut. They couldn't bring that detail in, right, Simon?
Yeah, there's one case in my book. The woman died just after a cesarean, having the C-section, and she was able to describe what happened in the operating theatre. But when they do a C-section, the woman is lying on her back, and they put these drapes up from her neck right up, so she can't see into the operating theatre.
Mm-hmm.
So as well as her heart had stopped and her brain flatlined, even if she was awake, she couldn't have seen what was happening. The drapes were in the way. And she talked to the staff afterwards, and they confirmed that she was right in what she saw. But she saw lots of other things as well.
Yeah, and sometimes they go even farther, right? Who is the individual who actually left and was able to see what a shoe on the ceiling, and that was verified?
Yeah, that's quite a famous case. It's called Maria's shoe, and she died in the hospital room. And she said she saw a shoe on the roof of the hospital, and she described how it was lying, the scuffs on it, what color it was, what angle it was sitting. And the nurse went looking for it, and she couldn't see it through the hospital windows. She couldn't see it from the ground looking up at the roof. But eventually she got up there with somebody, and there was the shoe exactly as Maria described it. And it was just impossible for Maria to have seen it in any ordinary way.
Yeah, it's incredible. Or the example of or the Deborah King, she was able to see with her eyes shut. She was able to see blood on the lead resident's shirt, something that wasn't there before, and there'd be no physical way for her to catch this.
Yeah, I really like her story because when she was a nurse, one of her patients died, and they came back and told her what she had been doing while she was a nurse, how she had asked the doctor to continue trying to resuscitate because they just couldn't get him back. And the doctor had said, let's call time of death. And she said, let's go one more round. And that's what the patient said afterwards. I saw you say, let's go one more round. And then before that, she'd had a small near-death experience where she was in a car crash and she was floating over the car, watching what was happening as her dad jumped out of the car and rushed around to see her. So years later, she had a much more extensive near-death experience. And it was interesting that during it, she was in the spiritual space, and the patient turned up that had died while she was a nurse. And she said to him, well, you're here? And he's like, yeah, where else would I be? So it's a great, like, I really like that chapter because there are these 3 different events in there with verifications.
Yeah, indeed. And what do you think what do you see as the impact on traditional medicine? I mean, basically it's telling us, A, there is some sort of afterlife, B, consciousness is non-local. I mean, that's the real impact. And again, it's very scientific and very verifiable. I mean, that's it. And do you see the scientific community perhaps softening with all this data, or what's your view on this? Where are we heading to?
Well, I think there is some softening. I think there's a thing where there were lots of, you might call the old guard, the older doctors through the 80s and 90s, but now they're retiring and they're moving on. And the younger, more open-minded doctors and scientists are coming through. There's still like a hardcore who just can't accept it. But there's also that thing called ontological shock, where if you have your paradigm, your worldview is that there's no afterlife, nothing spiritual, and we're just flesh and blood. And that is how you exist. That's your world. And something comes and really challenges it. It can be quite a shock. And so people struggle with that, and they get to a point, it seems, that they put their fingers in their ears and start saying, no, I can't hear you. What they say, don't bother me with the facts. My mind's already made up.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we're all like that, Simon. I mean, we hear some information that's going to have us readjust our worldview, and it can be small. We realize that our football team is not going to win the cup or so, and we don't want to accept it. You know, we humans, we want it safe, and we don't want to change. I mean, you can't blame people for the status quo that pays for their house and gives them a pretty comfortable life.
Yeah, yeah. I had my own kind of experience where something changed my viewpoint. Because in my podcast, I interview so many people, and I was talking to this medium about angels. And I've never been religious. And for me, angels are a myth. They're not real. And she's saying, oh, yeah, they're definitely real. She was saying that they're not like you would see them with white robes and big white wings. They're more like just kind of spiritual beings that are on a different path to your spirit guides or you. They don't incarnate on Earth. And she said, you'll know when they're around because there are feathers. And so the next day I'm walking down the street and this white feather just slowly comes out of the sky right in front of me. It just reminded me of what she said. I didn't really think much of it. And then a few weeks later, I'm interviewing another medium and she's talking about angels. And after we finished recording the episode, I was saying, oh yeah, this happened and I saw this feather floating out of the sky. And she said, oh, that's definitely angels around you. So I ended that call and I went to see my daughter. She was about 17 and she saw this very clean room. I go into her room to talk to her and there's a feather in the middle of the floor.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I said to her, where did that feather come from? And she looked down from her laptop and said, I don't know, and then went back to playing her game. So another thing happened. A few months after that, I go and see a medium, a local medium, because I'm always doing my investigations. And
Right.
we're sitting opposite each other on these big, comfortable chairs, and there's nothing between us, just open, clean carpet. And we do all the mediumship. And then afterwards, I start telling her about the feathers and these mediums I talked to. She says to me, look at the floor. And there's a feather on the floor in between us. And it had not been there the whole hour of the mediumship. Neither of us had got up and moved anywhere. And it seems like it just appeared out of nowhere, like it was teleported in. And I was kind of dumbstruck. And it's like your brain is at a point where you just cannot compute. I don't know where this feather came from. And so there were 3 incidences of feathers turning up there. And the 2 of them showed up when exactly the point where I was talking about a feather showing up in a weird way. So it seems like too much of a coincidence for it to come together like that. And I wonder if there were angels or spirit guides trying to communicate with me. And they did the first one and the second one, and they're almost like going like, oh man, what have we got to do to get through
You
to
gotta
this
send them
guy?
an email or something if he does.
Yeah. So, but the third one though, they got through to me. It really made me think, you know, what's going on here? What is this thing that maybe there is something that are kind of like angels, but you know, like I said, they're not playing harps and have big white wings.
Yeah. Well, as Jung would say, it's synchronicities, and you can simplify synchronicity as God, the universe, talking to you, and you were paying attention to its language, and it was saying, Simon, there is something out there. And I mean, sometimes, right, it's our cultural conditioning that gives us the image. To some it's an angel, to some it could be Shiva, to somebody more modern who reads a lot of Philip K. Dick, it could be UFOs, right? Whitley Strieber, it's an other that's out there. But we can't say there is something. There are other forms of intelligences and consciousness out there beyond human.
Yeah, I know. I wonder if they communicate with us in these weird ways, almost as of like they're trying to help you and push you along a path. And every time something happens, it's the next step on your spiritual path. So
Yeah.
if you see a UFO, they want you to see them
Right.
because they're trying to give you a message in some way. It's almost like a kick up the pants, and they're saying, hey, come on, pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder if that's what's happened to me over the years with all my experiences.
No, for sure. I mean, they speak in, what did Jacques Vallée say? The language of the angels sounds like insanity to humans. But yeah, you're right. You have to pay attention, and there's a level of steps so you're ready to be initiated. So they're not going to, like I said, email you and say, hey, Simon, we are angels. Here's some pictures on Instagram. No, you have to be initiated and go to them. So I think you're 100% right. So back to the idea of near-death experiences, and that's the other question. We want to get into some commonalities, but do we have still any idea of why these are triggered, why some people have them and some don't? Because, as I've talked to several people, something like ESP or even past life regression, sometimes it's trauma or it's necessity. You're in a crisis, and the natural abilities of a human to see behind the veil, to telepathy, to remember, are activated. That's because it's a natural part of our evolution. We're in a crisis. These things will be activated. But with near-death experience, is there any commonality why they are triggered or why they happen? Sorry.
Yeah, I wonder if it's down to the people that have them need them. And I think there are some people who they have near-death experiences, and it is years later that they remember it. I talked to a guy, this guy in my book, he was
Mhm.
6 months old, he had his near-death experience, and he only started remembering when he was 15 years old.
Mhm.
And I wonder if sometimes people like the spirit world are looking down at them and thinking, "Oh man, what's he doing?" And then they get into an accident or something, and they think, "Quick, grab him, give him a near-death experience. Let's get him back on the right path." It seems like the near-death experience somebody gets is tailored perfectly to them to make them change. But there's somebody else I talked to, Dr. Penny Sartori, who's a great NDE investigator.
Mhm.
She was saying that she thinks everybody will have a near-death experience, but only a small number remember them. Because you hear in near-death experiences, people are told things, whether it's from spiritual being or their loved ones that have died, that they say something like, "Well, we're going to allow you to remember just enough of this for you to know that it's real." And they give them knowledge, and then they say, "We're not going to let you remember all this knowledge." And there was a woman I talked to, she said she had this big table in front of her with her spirit guides, and they unrolled this blueprint. And this was her life's blueprint. And she could see all this stuff that was going to happen after the near-death experience. And they said, "No, we're not going to let you remember any of that." And they said, "You can make a change." And so she took out chronic illness, that what had happened during the near-death experience, that problem she'd had physically could have caused her to be chronically ill for the rest of her life. And she took that out of her blueprint, and then she recovered back to normal afterwards. But, you know, some people have distressing near-death experiences, which seems to be about 10% of people who have them. But I also wonder if the people that get those kind of experiences generally don't talk about them. So there may be a lot more people, because if somebody says to you, "I died and I went to hell," you might look at them and think, "Oh man, what did you
Yeah.
do that you're going to get sent to hell?"
Stay away from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, it's just thinking you get a near-death experience because you need one spiritually. And there may be people who don't have them because the spirit world think, "No, you're doing fine. You don't need this near-death experience."
Yeah, for sure. And I think for the Gnostics, they might say all of life is a near-death experience. The true
Yeah.
this is a memory that we're remembering up in another level. And it's the same also with ufology and others. People who are abducted or have UFO experiences, they change their life. They somehow, just the experience itself tells them to reevaluate their lives. There's something there. Time is short. Oh my God. So these are a good thing. And I think in Barbara's case, as you detail in your book, might be something she was in a terrible marriage with a very angry husband, and this was her wake up call: change your life. You've got to just get away. That's your primary purpose.
Yeah. Yes. And she said she had a great epiphany where she realized it wasn't her husband that needed to change, it was herself. And it was the insights she got during that near-death experience. But that's an interesting one, because all the verifications that she gave after she was resuscitated, and the neurosurgeon as well, standing next to her and listening to her explain, point out, "Oh, he did this and she did that," and the neurosurgeon's like, "I'm not going to stand here and listen to this," and he stormed out. That's the real materialist, isn't it?
Yeah, he just wasn't ready to hear the truth. And God, her story is harrowing because again, like with Jung, it was just a simple procedure. Something got botched up, and she ended up dying, or she went clinically dead. I think what they put too much, it was some sort of liquid they were putting, right?
Yeah, they were putting dye.
Liq-
She was having an operation the next day on her spine, and they were putting this dye in here, and she was on a table, and then the table would start tipping up and the dye would go down her spine, and they used x-rays to see if there was a leak from her spinal fluid. But the guy pressed the wrong button and the table went the wrong way and the dial went into her brain.
Ugh. Yeah, the
And
guy
she
had
did
his
say,
hand on the wrong switch or button. Something
yeah,
so
yeah.
small.
And she did say that the staff at the hospital wouldn't talk to her about it afterwards, because they knew they were liable and they could get sued, so they had to keep their mouth shut.
Yeah, but she was aware. Yeah, she was very aware. So what can we talk maybe about some of the we don't know why this is triggered. It's a mystery. We all have a mission. As we've talked, Simon, the universe has a message for us. We just need to pay attention, whether it's synchronicity or an alien coming or an angel. But what are some of the common elements that you talk about in your book for the audience?
Yeah, besides the verification events, there's the life review, which I think is very powerful, because the people in the book describe their life review in very different ways. Somebody will see it almost like they're standing in a bubble and they see their life happening all around them, all these different scenes. Somebody else said they saw this big box and it was inside the box. And somebody else says they were sitting at a table and it popped up like a hologram. But basically what happens is, and they say this happens in an instant, and you experience every second of your life, every day, every year, and that you understand it all. But it's all very emotional, because when you're having this life review, you see how you affected other people. That's what they're reviewing. It's kind of an emotional thing. But then you experience these scenes from the other person's point of view. So if you're really mean to them, you will feel how you made somebody feel so bad. And then if that person feels bad and goes off and is nasty to someone else, you see the ripple effect. And you also see where you're nice to someone and how that makes them feel good. And there's some of them talk about, they'll be watching the life review with their spirit guides or spiritual beings, and they are not being judged for anything they did, any of their bad behavior or their good behavior, but they feel when they're nice to someone, the spirit guides are really happy about it. And they could say it because the smallest little thing where you're just kind to someone is so important. And I think this is one of the reasons people change so much when they have a near-death experience. The life review is such a massive impact, and people come back with a whole different viewpoint, and they drop their materialism, and they may give up some great career, and they're chasing money and getting a raise at work, and then their wife divorces them. There's like 70% of NDEs get divorced afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the life review, they talk about it a lot, and I put it in these chapters, and it's interesting. For me, it makes me really think about my behavior as well. And I think that's one of the parts of the book that's quite impactful.
It is. And I mean, even I've not had a near-death experience. I remember small acts of kindness or something nice a teacher told me that was valuable, and I'm like, I'll never get to thank them. But those little actions have affected me for the better. So it's good to see this giant lattice of how we affect each other, and even like a butterfly effect, right, Simon? One little action can make a historic change. We're all hobbits. We can all change the course of history, right?
Yeah. And there's so many verifications in the book, and there's so much with the I'm really picking up my book, aren't I? But when I talk about it, I realize what's in there, and it's the people who came on my podcast who I interviewed, and I was able to quiz them about what happened and about the verification events. And then when I'd written the book, I sent them the chapters, and they were able to go through them and say whether or not it's accurate and if there are errors in there. So it's all been checked out by the people who actually had these experiences. And it's quite humbling, really, that these amazing people talk to me and that they'd be happy for me to write a chapter about them.
Yeah, it was meant to be. It was your call. That's what the universe had installed for you. So good mission. Yeah. And what shapes do these guardians or entities take in the afterlife? I mean, it's varied, right? You've got, like, I think it's Frank Romero saw a ball of light, but any commonalities, or do they just appear in varied forms?
Yeah, varied forms. I heard 2 or 3 people describe incredible light beings that could be 10 or 12 feet tall. And they say that they're so bright, the light, if you looked at them with human eyes, you'd go blind. But in that spiritual space, it just doesn't seem too bright. And then they talk about just spirit guides who look just like you or me, basically. Sometimes they describe them wearing robes with a sash around them. And there's one guy talks about his spirit guide had a long white beard and long white hair. And then there's deceased loved ones who also seem to be guides and showing people around and informing them. And yeah, it is quite a variety. And some people even talked about seeing like aliens in the afterlife in some way. There was a woman who was in this amazing landscape. It was a really nice green field. And there were all these people there wearing all these different clothes from different time periods. And even people who looked like they're from the future. And then there were some that didn't even look human. And then she realized that they were all her lives, her past lives, future lives, and that she could sense a part of her soul in all of them.
Wow.
So that was really interesting, because that comes up as well in near-death experiences, the confirmation of reincarnation, which is fascinating.
Oh, so they can feel other lives, their past lives too?
Yeah, for that lady, she saw all these different people.
Mm. And they were her.
Yeah. And they learned that, we're just coming into this life to learn something, and we've had many lives before, we'll have many lives after, and it's not just on Earth, it's all over the place.
Of
Because
course.
I think maybe we tend to look at the Earth as, as the center of everything, and reincarnation, you only ever incarnate on Earth. But I don't think our planet's so special. Our sun is not some incredible star that stands out from the rest.
No, there are many other worlds. And also, and I fall into this trap. I think time is linear. So I want like a reincarnation map. And then I realize, oh no, like I said, there's other worlds. I could reincarnate backwards or sideways, I mean, if time and space aren't fundamental, and again, near-death experiences tell us that, then the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, it's like your soul is experiencing all of the lives in the same moment. And I've talked to one guy who says he had a near-death experience, and he says that there's a multiverse out there as well. So there's lots of Simons, lots of Miguels all over all these different universes.
Yeah, and even I love this theory in the Kabbalah where you might two souls or three souls might share a body because they all have different karmic, destinies or missions. So there could be three beings inside Simon, and they all have three separate karmic destinies or missions in this world. So maybe that explains the voices in our head, right, Simon?
They're fighting over whose turn it is to be in control.
Yeah, we gotta go save that. No, we gotta do this and have a happy marriage. No. Well, let me bring in Graham. Graham, do you have a question or any question from the audience at this moment?
No, sure. I was going to say I have a few of them. The one that from the audience was from it should be in the start one.
I got it.
Yeah.
Just pull it up. Yes,
and it ties into some of my thoughts, which is how does the non-verifiable ones fit into your schema? It's great to have the verifiable ones, but I would imagine the vast majority of the NDEs people have aren't verifiable. They don't have those elements. And, that ties into the whole subjective time phenomena tag.
Yeah, I wonder how many have verified incidents, because when I talk to them on the podcast, they're very much talking about how it's changed their life and how we're all connected, and love is the main source and consciousness and energy, and they're trying to have this mission to put all this information across, and it becomes almost a secondary thing. I might get to a point in the interview and I say, well, did anything verified happen? And it's almost like oh yeah, but we're not talking about that, let's get back to the real stuff. And so they don't feel it's really that important. But there are plenty of near-death experiences where people don't have verification events. But it's interesting to look at it, I think that you see that there are verification events in some near-death experiences. So what does that say about the spiritual part of the experience? If this stuff is verified on Earth or wherever, does that verify the spiritual stuff as well and make it much more believable that it was really happening?
No, makes sense. I was going to say the other aspect is I haven't seen much written about NDEs in other cultures. Like people who, the Christian ones, they tend to see Jesus or some or religious figures. I was going to say, do people in like, say, the Hindu culture see Vishnu or Krishna? Okay.
Yeah. The atheists will see Jesus and Christians won't see any religious figures. It's funny in a way because there's a lot in like India, that part of the world, where people have near-death experiences and they get to a point where somebody will say, you're not supposed to be here, you have to go back. But they kind of say it's almost like a clerical error. It's like, oh, we needed to get Simon Bown, but not you, Simon Bown, another one. We made a mistake. We picked up the wrong person. So you've got to go
Bureaucracy is
back.
still the same in the spiritual world, huh? Mistakes are made.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've talked to somebody, a woman from Canada who saw Shiva during near-death experience. Somebody else saw Jesus and saw Buddha in a near-death experience. And there's a guy, Howard Storm, who had a near-death experience. I think he described himself as an aggressive atheist. And he was so, against the idea of religion and the afterlife. And after his near-death experience, he went to seminary and became a pastor. And he had a distressing near-death experience. He was in Paris. He's a professor in the US of art, and he took a load of students to Europe to go to these amazing galleries, and they were in Paris, and he had this sudden pain in his stomach. And he went into hospital, and it was so bad, and he died, found himself standing next to his bed looking down on his body. And he felt great, and he thought, I don't know what's going on here, but I feel fine. Why is my wife deliberately ignoring me now? But then there were some voices in the hallway saying, come on, we got to go now, Howard, now it's time to go. And he thought, it's time for my operation. So he went out, and there's these people there, and they said, come on, we'll go down the hallway, we'll take you where you need to be. And he went down the hallway with them, and he started thinking, the hospital didn't look this big from the outside. This hallway's really long. And as they got further down, it was getting darker and darker. And he eventually got to a point saying, you know what, I'm going to go back. And they started pushing and shoving him and said, no, you're coming with us. And they got quite aggressive and swearing at him. And they took him down this hallway until eventually it was just complete blackness. He couldn't see a thing. And they attacked him, and they really beat him hard, kicking and punching. And he said he ended up on the floor, and he heard this voice in his head saying, pray. And he was an atheist. He didn't know any prayers. And he started quoting Shakespeare. And he started saying something from a TV commercial. But then he remembered the Lord's Prayer, and he started saying that. And the people around him started swearing at him, telling him to shut up. But he also noticed they were backing off. So he kept on saying the prayer over and over. And this pinpoint of light appeared above him, and it came down, and he was picked up and taken into the light. And he said it was Jesus that picked him up. And I said to him, how do you know it really was Jesus? And he said, oh boy, if you meet him, So that after that, he recovered, and that was his huge change. That was his spiritual kick up the pants. And now he's a pastor.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Yeah, and what Graham was talking, I know when Jung had his near-death experience, he was taken to this Hindu world, Hindu gods and imagery, and he thought that's because he'd been studying it a week before, and that's what it took. He only, and what he knew was the bliss he felt, that spiritual freedom, that higher vibration. Do they feel that way, Simon, where they know this is it, this is a higher state of being, this is more freedom than being a hairless monkey down on earth?
Oh yeah, it's such a massive difference. They really notice, their perception is different, their eyesight is so much better, their hearing, they can think so much faster. and they feel connected to everything, and everything knows them, and they know everything. And there's a few in the book that talk about space where there's kind of massive light, and they realize that this is millions of souls, and that they all know each other absolutely, and they know him. But you can focus in on that ball of light and find each individual soul and communicate with them. And there's such a massive, tremendous love that's there in that space. It's almost like the word love doesn't do it justice, what it feels like.
Right.
And there was one guy that was, he met a guardian, a kind of spirit guy called Drake. And Drake was taking him on a tour of the afterlife and teaching him things. And it was this knowledge that would raise his frequency when he really understood something, and he was going up higher and higher through these levels in the afterlife. And so it was an understanding of how love is everything and how everything's connected. And we all come from, some call it God, some say source, some would say the creator. But you use the word God, it kind of tends to have so much religious baggage that comes with that. Yeah, so we do see that change. I think that, as Eben Alexander says to me, I'm name dropping a little bit there, it's like the physical brain is a reducing valve that slows down your intellect, and your eyeballs can only see a certain spectrum of color. And once you're released from that, you see all these incredible colors, because so many near-death experiences say they see colors there that you just don't see on Earth. And one near-death experiencer described Earth as a beige wasteland in comparison. And another one described it almost like Avatar in that movie when it's nighttime and all the plants are glowing.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah, going back to the super chat so we can just focus on it. And thanks for your support, Mark Voidwalker. But he talks about, I have had 2 near-death experiences, one which I woke up in an ER with a nurse and doctor staff all around, and I said, who brought me back? But nothing in the body. So his question was, on my second NDE, I experienced time incident where time slowed down. Is this a known phenomenon with near-death experiences, Simon?
Yeah. I wonder if it's part of the perception that your mind's going so much faster. People say they kind of have knowledge of everything. They just start to think of a question and they have the answer. But also there's that thing where it seems time doesn't exist in the afterlife. And I've had near-death experiences who've had different parts of their near-death experience. All these different things happen, and they'll say, I can't tell you in what order they happened. It's almost like they all happened at the same time. And I'll tell you each incident, but don't think that they happened in this order. So time is definitely seems and everything's happening in the now. It's not like you're there for eternity and you live for millions of years like an immortal. It's time doesn't exist. And I think some way it may be a concept that's hard to grasp.
Yeah, for sure. And some of them are changed. I like you talk going back to Franco Romero. I believe he's the one, he had a car accident. Was it drunk driving?
That's Malcolm
Okay.
Nair.
Yeah. Who is the one who actually got clairvoyance? I mean, it wasn't just while he was dead, but didn't he get clairvoyance powers afterwards for the rest of his life?
Yeah, he was recovered, and he was lying in the hospital bed just after he'd woken up. And it was like there was a queue of deceased loved ones who wanted to pass their messages on to the family that were there in the room with him. And he passed on a message from the grandmother. And one of the things was his aunt said to tell her daughter, who was in the room, you shouldn't cry for me. Stop crying all the time at night. And the daughter said, that's right. Since she died a few months ago, every night I'm in tears. And also, I think he was the one that went to see a psychiatrist afterwards. And because he thought the near-death experience was some kind of hallucination and it really affected him. And the psychiatrist was saying, yeah, we need to, help you with this. It's hallucination. And then suddenly the psychiatrist's grandmother showed up in spirit form. And he started telling the psychiatrist all this stuff from the grandmother. And the psychiatrist got angry with him and threw him out. But then called him later and said, you know, I don't know what happened to you, but I don't think it was a hallucination. You're on some sort of a journey. You're going to have to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm. And for the audience, you search these figures for your podcast, or is it some of them came to you? How did it work for putting your book together?
Yes, I've talked to many near-death experiences over the years. I talked to researchers as well, and I was thinking about these ones that had these verifications. That's when I was coming up with this idea for this book, and I thought, well, I'll email them now and see if they'll do a Zoom call and talk about it. So there's 24 of the people in the book that I did talk to, and they confirmed their chapter was correct. But then there's another small number in the book that come from other places, like Pamela Reynolds. She's died now. Al Sullivan, I think he's died. Then I've got a small number of short ones that are from like 100 years ago. There's one from 1911,
Right.
and there's others from the 1940s. So what's interesting there, I find, is that the people, like the guy who had the near-death experience in 1911, in those days, he called it astral projection. And what he describes is exactly what people describe today. It's the same phenomena, the same experience.
Yeah, for sure. Could you give us maybe, as we get close to the top of the hour, maybe one of your favorite examples or stories of a near-death experience from your book? Something that the audience might like?
Well, I really like the Tibor Putnoki's experience. He's a Hungarian man, and he went into hospital in the early 90s for really high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And doctors told him they were very worried about him. And a little while later, he had this terrible pain in his chest. And the next thing, he's standing in the ward, and the nurses are rushing past him and a doctor. And he's thinking, hey, this is great. I feel fine. I'm cured. And he looked round at the bed and he couldn't see who was in it. So he didn't know it was his body. And he even looked at the bed and thought, wow, he's getting a lot of attention. That must be a VIP patient. But he looked at this room on the side of the ward where the nurses prepare things, and it had a two-way mirror. So the nurses could see into the ward, but you can't see in the room from the ward.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought about it, and then in an instant, he was in there. And there was a nurse with a trolley in front of a cabinet, and she was taking all these things out of the cabinet really quickly and putting them on the trolley. And she dropped something, and that went under the cabinet. And he thought, that's interesting. I wonder what that is. And then suddenly it was like he was just a few inches from this item under the cabinet. He could see it. And he read what was on the item, what it was, and saw its serial number. And then he came back out again, and there was a nurse on the phone to her husband. Their children were ill, and she was trying to tell him where the doctor's phone number was. And, you know, back in those days, you had your own phone book that you would write your phone numbers in, because there's no mobile phones. You couldn't remember it. And Tibor thought, what's going on with this guy in this apartment? And then instantly he's in the apartment with this guy, and it's 7 kilometers from the hospital. So Tibor was able to look round the room and see the books on the shelves, the furniture, the carpet. And he noticed that the guy was wearing these socks that had little animal pictures on them. And Tibor thought to himself, what kind of a man wears socks like these? So a lot of other things happened to him, spiritual stuff, the life review, these kinds of things. And he was resuscitated. And after he stabilized, the doctor came to him and said, so you were dead for 9 minutes. What happened? And he said, well, I was in that room there and I saw these things happen. And the doctor went in and looked under the cabinet, and there was that item just as Tibor had described it. And Tibor even got the serial number correct on this box. And then they went to the nurse who was on the phone, and the doctor said, do you know this man? Has he been to your apartment? And she's, no, don't know him. So he said, well, he heard you on the phone to your husband and the children are ill and looking for the phone number. And she said, that is correct. That's absolutely correct. So they went to the apartment, and the doctor saw it was exactly as Tibor described it. And when the doctor returned to the hospital, he was holding those socks with the little animal pictures. It's kind of proof of what Tibor had seen. So that's a really hard case for the materialists. If they're saying, well, you're having CPR, you're not quite dead, you heard things, you may have hallucinated what's
Yeah.
happening around you, but then you couldn't know what the content of this phone call was in a room that you can't see into, and you definitely wouldn't know what this apartment looked like that's 7 kilometers away. And also they knew that the phone call occurred while he was getting CPR. So they knew that they could link those two up, the timing of them. And there was a funny bit. He said the nurse was running past him with the trolley, and he knew it was him they were trying to resuscitate, and he was trying to stop her. He was saying, "No, I'm fine. I'm dead.
I'm not
Leave me
dead."
alone."
Like from
Yeah.
Monty Python. I'm feeling much better.
Yeah.
Bring out your dead. Wow. Yeah, I can see the materialists. I'm sure they must come up with as crazy excuses as religious fundamentalists do. You know, he set it all up and then he killed himself or something crazy, you know. There really is no way out of this one, is there, Simon? There really isn't.
I don't think so.
No, I can't.
It's so far away from his body. He couldn't possibly have known about that.
How would he known? Yeah. And again, who would set this all up and then induce themselves into a risky situation of almost dying, setting all this up? And again, you give so many examples. Do we have instances or because on the internet, there's always been this discussion: if you see the light, don't go to it. And there's a famous exorcist, Father Malachi, who said no, because the Bible says Lucifer is dressed like an angel of light. And some say, yeah, go to the light. Some say don't. Do these figures have a choice whether they can, or what's the percentage? Are they given a choice? Hey, you can go to the next stage or you can come back. You have agency on which way to go.
Yeah, sometimes people are sold you have to go back. Other times they say you've chosen to go back. There's a couple in the book where they say, I didn't choose to go back. And they said, oh, yeah, you've made the decision. You were asked and you're going back. And it's almost a thing of, it's so different for different people. This thing of going into the light, where people might talk about the tunnel of light. But only a small percentage of people who have a near-death experience have the tunnel experience. Lots of them will just go and find themselves in the afterlife. Some of them talk about a black void that they're in for a short time. That's almost like a holding space before they move on. But also the tunnel experience can be very different for different people. There's a materialist kind of skeptic debunking of this, saying that when you're dying, your blood oxygen level drops so much, your peripheral vision shuts down, you have tunnel vision. And so that's saying that that's what the tunnel is. But there are near-death experiences who have that tunnel vision experience and then they die and have the tunnel experience. But also, I've had the tunnel described to me as being absolutely massive and full of light. I've heard it described as being small, so just one person can fit through it. I've heard people say they hear music in the tunnel. They see other people going up the tunnel. They've seen people coming back down the tunnel. There's one guy who said this tunnel looked like the fuselage of an aircraft, like he's in an airplane and all the seats have taken out. And it just went on forever in front of him and all the light was coming through the windows. And there was a girl, 7 years old. She said her tunnel was like made of transparent bricks. And all this multicolored light was coming in through the bricks. So this idea of a tunnel of light is not really real when you really get into the details of near-death experiences.
Wow. Yeah, very fascinating. And I'm sure mentioning the airplane, I'm sure since you've also studied ufology, there's a huge overlap with NDEs and ufology. It's almost a lot of parallels, right? When you meet an extraterrestrial or when you meet a visitor in another dimension.
Yeah, because there's people who seem to be abducted and their body stays behind. It's like their consciousness is taken or their spirit. And also there's the after effects. People have, after near-death experiences, may have psychic things. Right. They can't wear watches because they won't work. Electronic devices won't work around them. These amazing synchronicities. And people who have abductions have the same after effects. So there's some weird crossover there or to do with consciousness. But it's almost like that thing of we may never work it out. You got to die and get there to really understand it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as we get to the end, I think, Graham, any last super chat or question from yourself to the
Yeah,
abductive?
we did have a last super chat.
All right.
That was
Let
from
me,
Chris. If you want to pull that one up.
sure. Let's see. Thank you for the support, Chris. Really appreciate it. And Chris writes, re-entry into the body. Has anyone experienced intense body-wide heat, like the worst fever imaginable? This happened to me. Heard of that, Simon?
I've heard of different things, very different things. This Pamela Reynolds said it was like jumping into an icy pond when she returned to her body and felt very, very heavy. And others talk about the pain and the heaviness of the body. But some really, really hot, I think might have heard about that once, and everybody I've talked to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I did have a final one myself,
Sure.
Simon, and that is, have you looked into linkage between the near-death experiences and the gamma wave surge that happens of, it's heightened brain activity that's between 30 seconds and 2 minutes after the heart stops beating, is post-clinical death. But there seems to be this huge surge of brain activity, for about a minute and a half there. Have they found any linkage between that and near-death experiences? Tag.
I don't think they have, because I think there was it experiments on rats, and they found this a massive electrical surge in their brains when they died. And there was some doctor saying, "Oh, well, this is it. We've explained near-death experiences." But I don't think there's a link there. I don't think you can explain near-death experiences as just a sudden surge in electrical activity.
Makes sense. I could see it having that being the corresponding physical evidence of what's happening elsewhere as well. So,
Yeah,
just
maybe it's
curious
something
the
to do
thoughts
with the
on it.
spirit. Yeah,
Yeah.
could be something
Well,
to do with the spirit leaving the body.
yeah. I mean, there were theories, I think 19th century, where I forget the name of the thinker, that the universe was actually made of electricity, and electricity was sentient and created the universe. That's where Mary Shelley got her ideas of Frankenstein, because she also believed, oh, if we put electricity, it's like putting life and consciousness into a body. It wasn't, I'm going to ignite this. So, and of course, we've all heard of the Vril, and their electricity powers. And I think there's that theory where when you die, you lose, what, 3 ounces of weight immediately? 3 or 6 ounces?
Was it 37 grams or something?
That's it. I think there's even a movie that made it. But yeah, you immediately lose that kind of weight. So don't quote me on the amount. It's been a while. Fascinating topic for sure. So for the audience, I have your book and your website in the show notes, whether you're listening on the tubes or Rumble, or you're listening to the audio version on iTunes and all your favorite podcast suspects. But tell the audience where to find out more about your work. And where do you want to send them, Simon?
Well, the book's called Verified Near-Death Experiences. That's Amazon worldwide, and it's in other places like Barnes and Noble. They probably won't have it on the shelf, but you can order it from them. And my website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I specialize in taking people through past life regression. My podcasts are Our Paranormal Afterlife, and the other one's called the Alien UFO Podcast. And in total, it's 800 episodes, including
Wow.
the short ones, where I do a short reading from the guest's book, which is always fun to do.
Yeah, I like it too. Again, it's a kind of a murder mystery, fun. What's going to happen? Wow, that's a a lot of podcasts. And also, I saw on your website you do you work with people for past lives, but you will do a free consultation, right? If somebody is curious to work with you, you'll connect with them.
Yeah, you can go onto my calendar through the website's got a booking page, and I'll do a free 20-minute call to discuss what you would want to achieve in a past life regression. Some people do it for therapy, others do it like me, just to explore and see what comes up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something we've done on the show. Yeah, sometimes we we do carry the trauma and karma of our past lives, don't we, Simon? Especially the trauma, which I wish we
Yeah.
didn't, because there's enough trauma in this lifetime as it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
busy universe. It's a busy universe. Awesome. Well, I appreciate the support. I saw some great comments there, but we are at the end. Check out the book. If you have any skepticism about near-death experiences, this book might end it, unless, again, you're just going to put your fingers in your ears and go blah, 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 but that's fine. We all, when we're ready, we're ready. We all have a choice. I know sometimes I haven't been ready for things, like Simon wasn't ready to believe in angels, but the universe and your sacred mission will win in the end. You will go on this journey. Maybe it'll be the next lifetime, but that's just the way it is, and it's a good thing. So first, I'd like to say, Graham, thanks for keeping us company on this show.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. And, I think there are some people out there, I think they need to have some near-life experiences before they have a near-death experience.
Yes, that's a famous quote from Fight Club. We just had a near-life experience, by Brad Pitt. So good one. Good one. Well, Simon, again, thank you very much for coming on the show, your time, your research. I'm going to keep listening to your podcast, and really enjoyed your book. I highly recommend, I'm repeating myself, get his book. It's going to be an amazing ride. And yeah, thanks for coming on the show. And we look forward perhaps to the next time we can chat.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's been really nice talking to you and great questions. And I could do another hour all about reincarnation and past life regression and
There you go.
all sorts of things.
Well, maybe that's the way to go. Yeah, I mean, again, you've been doing such good, important work, so we certainly look forward to it. But we are at the end, people. We got some good podcasts coming this week and next week. So again, like, subscribe, share with your friends, support this Red Pill Cafeteria. And I hope you are getting closer to connecting with your higher self and are ready to see a much wider and richer universe than you could have ever imagined. So that's it. Write your own gospel, live your own myth.